The eternal return, a journey beyond the veil of consciousness. The mirror of being. In the beginning, there is consciousness, not as humanity knows it in its waking hours, cluttered with thoughts like autumn leaves upon still water, but consciousness in its pristine essence, unmarred by the fingerprints of individual perception. This consciousness exists as the silent witness behind all witnessing, the nameless seer behind all seeing, possessing an objective nature that remains unchanged whether it observes the flight of eagles or the falling of empires. Like a diamond that maintains its essential structure whether viewed in sunlight or shadow, consciousness holds within itself an immutable core that transcends the ever-shifting landscapes of subjective experience. The mystic who seeks this deeper truth must embark upon a journey inward, moving beyond the ceaseless chatter of mind and memory, beyond the flickering images that dance upon the screen of awareness like shadows in Plato's cave. This voyage requires no map drawn by cartographers of the material world, for it charts territories that exist before space itself was born, realms that abide when time itself shall cease its endless counting. To discover this objective nature, this pearl of infinite price buried beneath the sediment of accumulated thought, the seeker need only begin where they are. Whatever state consciousness presently inhabits becomes the threshold, the sacred doorway through which one passes into greater mysteries. The given consciousness, as it appears in each moment, is not an obstacle to transcendence but rather the very ground upon which the ladder to heaven rests. One need not wait for perfect conditions, for the stars to align in auspicious configurations. The journey begins now, in this very breath, with this very awareness that reads these words and wonders at their meaning. The evolution of the sacred I. Through the vast corridors of human history, consciousness has gradually awakened to its own deeper nature, much as dawn slowly illuminates a landscape that existed fully present in the darkness. Primitive humanity, dwelling in the twilight of spiritual infancy, perceived the sacred through veils of thick fabric, mistaking shadows for substance, reflections for reality. Yet with each passing age, each turning of the cosmic wheel, the given consciousness of humanity has drawn nearer to the absolute truth, like a moth spiraling ever closer to the flame that both attracts and consumes it. The philosophical sages and religious visionaries who have graced this earth served as midwives to consciousness, helping humanity birth itself into ever greater awareness of its true nature. Their insights pierced through the ordinary like shafts of light penetrating storm clouds, revealing glimpses of that ultimate reality which lies behind, beneath, and within all phenomenal existence. With each genuine encounter with the divine, the objective nature of consciousness became less obscured, more distinct, as though a fog were gradually lifting from an ancient temple, revealing architectural marvels that had always stood present but unseen. In the last 2,000 years of humanity's spiritual evolution, a profound recognition has emerged across diverse traditions and distant lands, that there exists one reality and one reality alone, a singular being to which all other beings trace their lineage, from which all derive their existence like rays streaming from an invisible sun. This convergence of insight across cultures and centuries speaks not to mere coincidence but to a fundamental truth about the nature of existence itself, a truth that reveals itself to those who dive deep enough beneath the surface waves of multiplicity into the still depths of unity. The Philosopher's Stone. 25 centuries past, in the golden age of Athens, the philosopher Plato stood at the threshold of this great mystery and spoke of being, the completely being, as the ultimate foundation upon which all existence rests. This perfect is, he proclaimed, transcends the grasping mechanisms of rational thought. It cannot be reduced to a concept, cannot be captured in the net of logic, cannot be contained within the boundaries of any general idea that the mind might construct. It stands as an objective principle beyond understanding, prior to comprehension, more fundamental than the very capacity to comprehend. Like ancient pilgrims approaching a holy mountain, later philosophers continued this ascent toward ultimate truth. When Hegel arose in his time, he brought forth a revolutionary insight, that being and cognition are not separate realms but unified expressions of a single reality. In this vision, being is not passive substance awaiting observation but dynamic activity, conscious energy itself. The is that upholds existence is not a static foundation but a living presence, a state of consciousness that contains within itself all possible states, all conceivable phenomena, all that was, is, or ever shall be. This pure presence that cannot be adequately named, encompasses everything from the smallest grain of sand to the vast wheeling galaxies, from the fleeting thought of a child to the eternal truths of mathematics. To this infinite is, all states of consciousness inevitably refer, as rivers must flow to the ocean, as compass needles must point to their magnetic home. In the modern era, the existential philosophers pushed further into this mystery, approaching through immediate, given consciousness the recognition of pure is, as nothing other than our own true nature, not something distant to be achieved but the very ground upon which we always already stand. The sacred pathways. Along parallel roads, the great religious movements of East and West have traveled toward the same summit, though they climbed by different faces of the mountain. Buddhism, with its profound doctrine of emptiness and its direct pointing at the luminous nature of mind, discovered that all separate things merge into one reality when properly perceived. The Vedantic sages of ancient India, meditating in forest groves and mountain caves, realized that Atman and Brahman, the individual self and the cosmic self, are not two but one, that the dewdrop does not merely reflect the ocean but is itself oceanic in essence. Even those traditions that approached the ultimate reality with greater caution, naming it as indefinable and unknowable in its essence, such as Christianity in its apophatic tradition, arrived through their most profound mystics at a startling recognition. Only God exists in the final analysis, and this God can be perceived only when the mind empties itself of all individual contents, all personal concerns, all separate desires. The Christian contemplatives spoke of dying to self that Christ might live within them, of a consciousness so transparent to the divine that no distinction remains between human awareness and God's own knowing. In the mystical heart of Islam, the Sufis dance and whirl their way toward truth, proclaiming with radical devotion that nothing exists but Allah. The individual ego, they declare, is not merely an error but a blasphemy, a false claim of independent existence in a universe where only one truly is. Their path leads to phanophyla, the extinguishment or extinction of the separate self in God, where the drop of individual consciousness dissolves into the infinite ocean of divine being, losing nothing of its essence but gaining everything in the recognition of its true nature. Across all these traditions, despite differences in language, ritual, and cultural expression, runs a common thread of gold: the recognition that ultimate reality is singular, unified, whole. The mystic experiences of saints and sages from every corner of the earth bear witness to the same fundamental truth, much as travelers approaching a great mountain from different directions all describe, in their various languages, the same towering peak. The imperative of unity. For those dwelling in this 21st century, surrounded by the fragmentations and multiplicities of modern existence, the ancient wisdom calls with renewed urgency. Any philosophical understanding or religious vision that would speak meaningfully to the present age must recognize reality as fundamentally one and united, a seamless wholeness within which all apparent separate realities find their true home and proper context. This is not a matter of preference or belief, but a recognition of what objectively is, what has always been and must forever remain. The truth that the mystics proclaim does not require humanity's acceptance to be valid. It stands independent of opinion, unchanging in the face of denial or affirmation. Like it or not, whether the mind rebels against it or embraces it with joy, our objective nature is eternal, immutable, complete. We are not beings who must be saved from some essential corruption, nor can we fall from this fundamental ground of being. All the dramas of salvation and damnation, all the narratives of spiritual progress and regression, are surface movements only, waves upon an ocean that never loses its essential nature regardless of its surface conditions. We belong to the Absolute as the wave belongs to the sea, as the ray belongs to the sun, as space belongs to space itself. This belonging is not a relationship that can be severed or strengthened, it is the very ground of existence itself. Whatever limited, confused, or darkened state of given consciousness an individual might experience, whether drowning in ignorance, lost in delusion, or caught in the grip of destructive patterns, cannot alter this fundamental reality. The Absolute does not abandon its own expressions, for it has nowhere outside itself to go. The Pathless Path. The journey to recognition of this truth requires no complex techniques or elaborate preparations, though many such methods have been devised by traditions seeking to support those who walk this way. At its essence, the path is simple. One must go beyond individual mental activities, beyond the constant commentary of the personal self, beyond the identification with thoughts, emotions, and sensations as defining who one truly is. This going beyond is not a movement in space or time but a shift in perspective, a relaxation of the grip by which consciousness holds to its limited self-conception. It is like a fist that has clutched tightly for so long it has forgotten it is a hand, slowly opening to discover its true nature. When individual activities, the endless planning, remembering, judging, desiring, are allowed to settle like sediment sinking in a glass of water, what remains is the clear consciousness that was always present, the awareness that precedes and enables all experiences. This pristine awareness cannot be created or destroyed, improved or degraded. It can only be recognized or overlooked, acknowledged or ignored. The seeker who would discover this truth need not become something they are not, but must simply awaken to what they have always been. This is the great paradox and the great simplicity of the mystical path. The goal is the ground upon which one stands, the treasure is the very capacity to seek it, and arrival is the recognition that one never truly left home. The sooner the better. Time is a curious dimension in matters of spiritual awakening. From one perspective, there is infinite time, for consciousness is eternal and cannot ultimately be lost or destroyed. Yet from another viewpoint, there is no time to waste, for every moment spent in ignorance of one's true nature is a moment of unnecessary suffering, a day passed in the prison of illusion when the door has always stood unlocked. The urgency that mystics feel, the intensity with which they pursue realization and encourage others toward awakening, stems not from fear of some eternal damnation but from compassion for the suffering that arises from misidentification. When consciousness mistakes itself for a limited, separate entity struggling for survival in an indifferent universe, it experiences anxiety, isolation, and a profound sense of alienation. Yet this suffering is based on a fundamental misunderstanding, like someone who dreams they are drowning and experiences genuine terror, though they sleep safely in bed. To awaken from this dream, to recognize the absolute nature of one's being, is to step into a freedom that was always present but overlooked. It is to discover that the prison bars were made of shadows, that the chains binding us were woven from thoughts, that the exile was self-imposed and the home never actually left. The sooner this recognition dawns, the sooner the unnecessary suffering can cease, not through any change in external circumstances but through a fundamental shift in the understanding of what one is. Beyond the mind's dominion. The rational mind, magnificent though it is as a tool for navigating the practical world, cannot grasp the ultimate reality through its usual operations. Logic deals with relationships between distinct entities, with propositions that can be true or false, with categories that can be separated and compared. But the Absolute transcends all such distinctions. It is not an object among other objects, not a concept among other concepts, not a truth among other truths. To approach this reality requires a kind of knowing that moves beyond logical demonstration, not because it is illogical or anti-logical, but because it is translogical, operating in a register where the usual rules of discursive thought no longer apply. This is the irrational wisdom of which the mystics speak, not a surrender to unreason but an opening to a deeper reason, one that works through direct experience rather than through conceptual mediation. Faith enters here not as blind belief but as trust in the validity of direct spiritual experience, as confidence that consciousness can indeed know itself by turning attention back toward its own source. The sense of unity that arises in mystical states, the direct perception that all is one, carries its own authority, its own self-validating certainty. This certainty does not depend on external verification or logical proof. It is immediate, undeniable to the one who experiences it, like the certainty with which one knows, I am. The sacred silence. At the heart of all mystical traditions lies an acknowledgement of the sacred, the absolute, the ineffable mystery that cannot be fully captured in words or concepts. All language, all symbols, all teachings ultimately point toward something that transcends articulation, not because it is vague or undefined but because it is too full, too complete, too all-encompassing to be contained within the boundaries of any description. The divine presence that mystics encounter in the depths of contemplation bears qualities that strain language to its breaking point. How can words convey the experience of being simultaneously nothing and everything, of consciousness both utterly empty and infinitely full, of a peace that contains all passion and a stillness that pulses with dynamic life? The mystic resorts to paradox not from confusion but from necessity, attempting to use the limitations of language to point beyond itself, like using a thorn to remove a thorn. This mystery that dwells at the core of existence is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be entered, not a question to be answered, but a presence to be absorbed into. It is the ground from which all questions arise and to which all answers return. The sacred cannot be grasped but can be recognized. The absolute cannot be comprehended but can be realized. The ineffable cannot be spoken but can be known in a knowing that transcends the usual subject-object duality. The return. Ultimately, the mystical journey reveals itself to be not a going away from ordinary life, but a return to life's sacred foundation. Transcendence is not an escape from reality, but an entering into reality's deepest dimension. The seeker who ascends the mountain of consciousness discovers at the summit that all the valleys and plains below are sacred too, that the ordinary and the transcendent are not separate realms but different aspects of a single seamless whole. This recognition brings about a transformation in how one moves through daily existence. The realized soul sees the Absolute shining through every face, feels the divine presence pulsing in every moment, recognizes the eternal as underlying every temporary form. Life continues with its joys and sorrows, its challenges and comforts, but all are now held within a greater context. All are known to be movements within consciousness itself, rather than threats to a vulnerable separate self. The mystical peace that settles upon one who has touched this truth is not the peace of withdrawal or detachment, but the peace of profound acceptance and recognition. It is the peace of coming home, of discovering that one never truly left, of realizing that the search for God was God seeking himself, that the journey to the Absolute was the Absolute's own movement within itself. In this eternal return, the circle completes itself. Consciousness, having forgotten its nature and searched everywhere for what it is, finally recognizes itself and rests in the simplicity of pure being. The seeker becomes the sought, the lover becomes the beloved, the question dissolves into the answer, and what remains is simply this: vast, intimate, eternal, immediate, forever present yet somehow forever fresh. The invitation. The truth proclaimed by mystics across ages and cultures extends its invitation to all who have ears to hear, eyes to see, hearts open to receive. It does not require special qualifications or exceptional abilities. It asks only for a willingness to look deeply, to question fundamental assumptions, to release the tight grip on individual identity, and allow consciousness to reveal its own nature. In this present moment, regardless of how ordinary or extraordinary it may seem, the Absolute stands revealed for those who have learned to see. In the space between thoughts, in the silence beneath sound, in the awareness that notices awareness itself, the eternal makes itself known. Not later, not elsewhere, not after arduous preparation, but here, now, always. The sooner this recognition dawns, the sooner one can cease the futile struggle against one's own nature and rest in the simple truth of what is. The path is pathless, the journey without distance, the arrival always already accomplished. What remains is only the gentle awakening to what has always been true, that consciousness, in its objective nature, is eternal, complete, and one, and that this consciousness is none other than the very awareness through which these words are understood, the presence that reads them, the being that illuminates all knowing. May this understanding arise. May the veil grow thin. May all beings recognize their true nature and rest in the peace that passes understanding, the peace of the Absolute knowing itself through every form, the joy of consciousness celebrating its own infinite expression, the love of the One for its own eternal being.